founding fathers of this country made a decision that they were going to not share their aspirations for human dignity and freedom, that was not going to be shared with the African people. That was not going to be shared with the native people. The only people who were worthy of sharing in the freedom that they established was rich white owners of property. And that was the order, and especially after the development of the cotton gin and the development of the manufacturing bases in England, cotton became the most valuable commodity in the whole world. And so all of the people who were on the make decided to begin to grow cotton. And because they were deciding to grow cotton, they needed more hands to pick that cotton, separate that cotton. And that was the basis of the accumulation of capital and the development of capitalism. The capitalist manufacturers in England went whole hog in developing the cotton trade. Cotton and the production of cotton cloth was the main basis of the development of capitalism. And we have to understand that when there is a call for reparations, that reparations are not only due, but they're justified. Because all of the banks, all of the insurance companies, Wall Street, all these people were invested in the cotton trade and in the enslavement and mistreatment of African people. But of course, there was opposition to this development, and they developed in this country the abolitionist movement. An important thing to understand is it was a movement. It was a movement of people. It wasn't just people arguing about philosophically black people are human and should be treated as human and have their human rights. It was understanding that these people have a grip on this society, and they're not going to give it up without struggle. And so we have a tradition in this country of struggle. And that struggle began around the question of the treatment of African people. And that treatment of African people has always been a barometer of so-called freedom in this country. Every step forward in the democratization of this country, the spread of more freedom, has been on the backs and out of the hides of the African people. And the African people, in their struggle and their sacrifice, of course, agitated for and won the support of a number of white people who understood that there was a real contradiction in the society. That you could not have a society that's built upon the genocide of the native people and the enslavement of African people and call yourself a democracy. But that is the burden that the white ruling class in the United States decided to adopt. But as it developed, of course, there was a clash between the semi-capitalist mode of production producing cotton and the quickly developing northern bourgeois who was creating cotton mills. And there was an inevitable clash between those who believed in slave labor versus those who believed in wage slavery. And so, of course, the northern capitalist class saw the contradictions and wanted to free this country of the stigma been a slave society, and that was done. So in 1861, of course, the Civil War broke out with the election of Abraham Lincoln. And of course, they don't tell you this, but the African people were their own liberators. More than 200,000 black men abandoned the plantation, and as Du Bois says, went on general strike. They refused to continue to labor in the fields, and that was a reserve for the Northern Army, even though, of course, they were infected with the racist outlook as well. But that was something that was the completion, if you will, of the American Revolution. It was extending to the chattel, or the former chattel, extending to black people the right to be full-class citizens, first-class citizens, along with whites. And that became critical. Of course, you know that the North won the Civil War. And, of course, they would put in place 3 amendments, freeing the slaves, giving them the right to vote, and giving them citizenship. The problem, of course, was there was no agrarian revolution. There was no land to the tillers. Even though there was rumors of 40 acres and a mule, nobody really worked to ensure that that happened. Even though we know that there were many instances, especially around the Georgia and Florida and South Carolina seacoast, where the African people invaded those islands, what was called the Sherman Reservation, and refused to give that land back to the slave owners when they came back. So that was a very important aspect of it. And of course, Reconstruction only lasted about 7 years. From 1866, and of course 1870 before the right to vote was granted. And so by 1876, in the election of Hayes and Tilden, the African people were finally granted the right to participate in the government of the South. And of course, the people who participated got elected to all kinds of offices, and that's when the Klan was also unleashed to suppress black people's rights to participate in it. And of course, Hayes-Tilden Compromise came in, and basically Rutherford B. Hayes was granted the presidency with the agreement that they would withdraw the Union troops from the South. What that meant, of course, was that the newly freed Africans were at the mercies of the former plantation owners. And that's when they began to inaugurate black codes, and of course, all of that, what we call the native of our businesses, who were in limbo, had no friends, and of course, the leadership that was put forth from Booker T. Washington was accommodationist. You know, he said that it was not important that we have political rights, that it was important that we had the right to earn a living. And of course, that was highly upsetting to W.B. Du Bois and the Niagara movement people, who said that we had to fight for all of our rights, and that we should never forfeit that. And that became part of that. But that whole 100-year period, from 1866 to 1966, basically encompasses the struggle of African people. Now, the thing that's interesting was that of course, during World War I, many Africans, men, were drafted into the army and fought. And when they came back home, they were insisting that since they had fought for this country, that they should have the same rights as everybody else. And of course, this year also marks the 100th-year anniversary of the Red Summer of 1919. There were pogroms or assaults on black communities all over this country. White races had organized and said they were insulted that black men would come wearing uniforms from the U.S. Army and Navy. And they would strip them of their uniforms, beat them, and ultimately set their communities on fire. But what I'm trying to say is that these men who had fought and had heard about the great upheavals that was going on all over Europe, especially the Russian Revolution, they understood that there was change developing all over the world. That the working class was asserting its power. And of course, in this country, the working class is made up of all kinds of nationalities. And in this instance, the workers from the black community demanded that they have jobs with equal pay and that they have the right to live where the hell they want to live. And that was not satisfactory to the white ruling class. And that's when they implemented all the racist covenants. They said that black people couldn't live redlining and all these things. But at the same time, as the struggle developed, the Communist Party organized people like the African Blood Brotherhood, led by Cyril Briggs. And Cyril Briggs was the first development of a conscious black workers organization. And the African Blood Brotherhood stood for full equality and for the right of the self-determination of black nation and black belt South. That's important to understand. During the years between the First and Second World War, that was the first mass migration of black people from the rural South to the ghettos in the North. And that, of course, continued until World War II, when there was a shortage of labor because of the cutting off of labor from Europe. And African people, again, moved to the cities, Chicago, Detroit, the big industrial cities, out to the West Coast. And this was when, for the first time, the black workers began to assert their leadership. The leadership of the black liberation struggle during the whole period of Reconstruction was mainly led by the black middle class leaders, Du Bois and Booker T. Washington. And of course, there was intervention by Marcus Garvey, who came to this country in 1914 and began to advocate that black is beautiful and that we can develop ourselves and work for ourselves and gain our freedom. But most importantly, that we can go back to Africa and build up the African continent. And that was part of that whole movement among African people. But let me go ahead and try to get some of this done. Now, what's important to understand is that all of the progress, so-called, that we've made in this country has been made out of sacrifice of the African working class masses. Even though the leadership has been of the black petty bourgeois and bourgeois class, the foot soldiers in this fight have always been the working people. And so there was always that conflict, that tension between the aspirations of the black bourgeoisie that wanted to promote black capitalism and the black working class that wanted complete freedom and liberation for working class people. That is why they looked favorably on the Soviet Union that came out of World War I. You had people like Harry Haywood, Cyril Briggs, Paul Robeson. All these people were attracted to the Communist Party because they understood that this party was about the freedom of the working class people and about the destruction of the property of the property class. And that was very important. Fast forward to the 1950s, of course, we had the mass response to the Montgomery bus boycott. And then we had the mass response to the murder of Emmett Till. Emmett Till, or debt of gratitude to Mamie Till, who chose to show her son's mutilated body rather than allow these racists to murder him, get away with it. That had a catalytic impact on the black liberation struggle. Black people understood that they had to really abandon, or at least debate, the whole strategy of nonviolence, which was promoted by CORE and SPLC. People began to, and Smith as well, but people began to question, why don't we fight back? And that was especially the job of Malcolm X, who had become the chief spokesman for the Nation of Islam. And of course he talked about swinging instead of singing. That black folks should fight and fight back and be men and women and not accept the racist assaults against us. Of course, it also produced the whole Robert Williams. Robert Williams of Monroe, North Carolina, wrote a book called Negroes with Guns. And it was a very important pamphlet because it asserted the right of black people to defend themselves against Klan attacks. He was kicked out of the NAACP because the NAACP said they were pledged to nonviolence. And of course, Robert Williams said, if these Klansmen come in our neighborhoods, we know what to do. At the same time, there was a development here in Louisiana, the Deacons for Defense, who had the same attitude that we are not going to sit by and let these marauders come into our neighborhoods and we not fight back. And of course, in California, Bobby Seale and you and me heard about the Deacons for Defense. They said that's a novel idea. These people have armed themselves against Klan attacks. There was a big problem of police terror in Oakland. They said that we should arm ourselves against these police assaults. And of course, once they marched on the State House in Sacramento, it was like a bolt of lightning. It energized young black people all over the country. The Black Panther Party became the visual representation of militant struggle. Not only militant struggle, but they also introduced anti-imperialist analysis. They passed out millions of copies of the Red Book and said that black people should embrace the struggle for revolution, and that this capitalist system that we live under had to be overthrown. And of course, the response of the government was to unleash COINTELPRO. And COINTELPRO was an old program that had actually begun in the 1940s when the government was trying to figure out who was behind the defense of the Scottsboro Accords. A lot of the NAACP types were really anti-communist. didn't want the Communist Party to be part of the defense of the Scottsboro Boys, but they were so effective in their organizing that they won the day on that thing. But in any case, the Black Panther Party unleashed the pent-up desire of black people to fight back against their oppression and their oppressors. And out of that whole motion also came a black working class response. In Detroit especially, the League of Revolutionary Black Workers was founded in 1973. And the League of Revolutionary Black Workers basically said that black workers must take the lead. That black workers were the only class among black people that had no interest in promoting capitalism, had no interest in buying into a system of exploitation. And that became important development. They, of course, accused the old line Communist Party USA of being a revisionist party, non-revolutionary, who believed in the peaceful transition to power. And of course, every revolutionary around the world watching the situation in China and Vietnam and Cuba understood that freedom comes out of the barrel of the gun. That if you want to be free, you got to fight for it. And these people ain't gonna give you ain't gonna give you your freedom. And not only do you have to siege power, but you got to defend that power. And so that became one of the critical issues. And of course, the response of the federal government was to flood our neighborhoods with drugs. Crack cocaine in the 1980s. Not only that, but in the 60s, the government tried to keep guns out of our hands. 60s and 70s. In the 80s, they were passing out guns to these gangs all over the country because they knew that these people were not trained as the Black Panther Party had trained people. The Black Panther Party at least told people who you should aim your weapon at. That you should not aim your weapon at your brothers and sisters. That you should aim at the pigs who are banging on you all the time. But once it became clear that these young people would commit fratricide and shoot themselves and their brothers and sisters, they flooded our neighborhood with guns. There's not a neighborhood in this city that you can't go to a young man or a young woman and they know where they can get a gun. And that is not a healthy situation for our perspective, because we have to build a movement. We have to question this regime of police terror. And we have to really rescue our people from all these nefarious schemes by the white ruling class and their minions to keep us blind, deaf, and dumb. You young people have a slogan here, y'all say y'all woke. We need to wake you up. We need to say to you that if you want freedom for yourself, if you want to avenge 4 centuries of oppression, 4 centuries of exploitation, 4 centuries of racism, then you should be out here fighting with us, because only that fight is going to eliminate racism and oppression. And I'm going to stop there and we can have some discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll give it up for the brother Malcolm Silver again, man. Always holding it down. We also got a couple of calls to action. We're not just talking and whatnot. And we're gonna have my sister Angela. We're eventually gonna have Angela gonna give us a little call to action and a couple of follow-up things that we could do. But before we get to that, we wanted to see, some feedback from the audience and the crowd. If the mic's not gonna be able to be traveled or whatnot, but you can just project your voice a little bit. If you got any questions for the panel, or just you want to share amongst each other, we could keep it brief and keep it moving. And if you got something to say, go ahead and let it be heard. Anybody? is it just? And
So I have a question. I want to thank everybody who presented tonight. Thank you so very much. This question is for NOWG. So one of the things I appreciate about you tonight is you were able to give us that historical context. You were able to give us a lot of history in a short period of time. And unfortunately, people can spend years and years in school and not do what you gave us tonight. So my question is, now that we have heard that information, what would you want us to walk away with knowing most so that we could use that information to get to action? What would you say?
Well, I think, given that this country is acknowledging that there's been 4 centuries of our slavery, we should take